The flight attendant's voice echoed loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time to move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her words carried a sharp edge, her tone dripping with condescension. Clint Eastwood, calm as ever, looked up at her. "I've already told you, I'm not moving," he said simply. His tone was even, almost soothing, but it held an undeniable strength. He was humiliated in front of everyone, but no one expected what would happen next, when the man they thought was powerless stood up and revealed who he truly was. As we delve into the story, if you believe everyone should be treated with respect, no matter their status, click the subscribe button now and tell us where you are watching from. The plane gleamed under the afternoon sun, its sleek design promising a luxurious journey for its passengers. Inside the cabin was nothing short of opulence: plush leather seats, gold accents, and an air of exclusivity that made everyone inside feel like royalty. Passengers moved with ease, their expensive luggage rolling behind them as they were ushered toward the sleek private jet waiting on the tarmac. Soon, they settled into their spots, some scrolling through their devices, others sipping champagne offered by the attentive flight crew. Inside the plane, soft ambient music played in the background. Among them was Clint Eastwood, a calm and composed man in his late 60s, dressed in a tailored dark blazer and matching slacks. Clint exuded an understated elegance. He moved with quiet confidence, making no effort to draw attention to himself. Clint Eastwood stepped into the cabin, his calm presence drawing attention. His steps were measured, and his gaze swept the cabin briefly before he moved toward his seat. His destination wasn't just another trip. It was a journey to oversee his growing empire. Though no one on board yet knew who he was, he preferred it that way, for now. Lauren Mitchell, the lead flight attendant, stood near the entrance. Her crisp uniform was perfectly tailored, her sharp features exuding control. She greeted the passengers one by one, her smile warm for some, colder for others. She prided herself on keeping order on the plane, though her idea of order often depended on how people looked or behaved. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, the couple in their 60s, exuded the ease of seasoned travelers. Mrs. Harrison clutched a small knitting bag, her fingers already twitching to begin her work, while Mr. Harrison carried a folded newspaper, his expression one of mild curiosity as he took in the scene. Lauren, good morning. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, lovely to have you with us again. Clint glanced over his shoulder, noticing the stark contrast in Lauren's tone. His expression remained calm. Through his eyes, he reflected an awareness of the unspoken dynamics at play. As other passengers settled, Lauren moved through the cabin, ensuring everything was in place. She checked the Harrison couple, offering them a bright smile. "Is there anything I can get for you before we take off?" Mrs. Harrison shook her head politely, already absorbed in her knitting. Mr. Harrison nodded toward his coffee, indicating he's satisfied. When Lauren passed Clint, her demeanor shifted again. She glanced at Clint's bag resting neatly under the seat, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't offer the same courtesy or warmth, simply walking by without a word. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's attitude shifted based on appearances? Share your experience in the comments below and click on the subscribe button. Lauren Reed, in her early 40s, carried herself with the precision of someone who thrived on control. Her pristine uniform and perfectly coiffed hair matched her sharp demeanor. To Lauren, appearances mattered more than anything else, and her judgments were swift and unapologetic. Lauren's eyes narrowed as she watched Clint settle in. Something about Clint didn't sit right with her. Not his clothes, not his calm self-assurance, not the fact that he didn't immediately seek attention like many of the passengers Lauren deemed worthy of respect. In Lauren's mind, Clint simply didn't belong. She approached Clint with quick, purposeful strides, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone polite but dripping with condescension. "I think you're in the wrong section." Clint glanced up at her, his expression calm. "I believe this is my seat," he replied, his voice steady. Lauren's smile didn't waver, but her tone sharpened. "I don't think so. This section is reserved for our elite passengers." Nearby, Other passengers began to notice the exchange. A nosy socialite sitting nearby leaned slightly to get a better view. Her curiosity piqued. A friendly businessman across the aisle glanced over, frowning slightly at Lauren's tone. Clint remained composed, his gaze steady as he replied, "You might want to double-check your passenger list before making assumptions." Lauren's eyebrows arched, her irritation barely hidden. "I don't need to check anything," she said sharply. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The tension in the cabin thickened as passengers exchanged glances, whispering quietly to each other. Others, uncomfortable, pretended not to notice. One passenger muttered, "Why doesn't he just move if he's in the wrong seat?" Another shrugged. "He's probably trying to sneak in for a free upgrade." Lauren crossed her arms, standing her ground. "If you don't move to the back of the plane," she said, her voice loud enough for others to hear, "I'll have to call security." Clint tilted his head slightly, his calm expression unwavering. "Call whoever you need to," he said. "But I'm not moving." The nosy socialite gasped softly. The businessman leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Lauren, now visibly frustrated, turned to the junior flight attendant, Grace, who stood nearby watching nervously. "Escort her to the back." Lauren snapped. Grace hesitated, glancing between Clint and Lauren. She wanted to speak up about checking the passenger list as Clint had suggested, but Lauren's sharp glare froze her in place. Reluctantly, she nodded and stepped forward. Clint shifted slightly in his seat, his calm demeanor still intact. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing," he said softly, his words carrying more weight than Lauren realized. Lauren scoffed, waving off the warning. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. "Now get up. What would you do if someone treated you like this on a flight? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're loving this story so far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more." Lauren's tone grew sharper as she gestured toward the back of the plane. "You're not supposed to be here," she said again, her voice now tinged with impatience. The passengers watched in stunned silence, the tension crackling in the air like static. Clint leaned back slightly, his gaze steady on Lauren. "You shouldn't make assumptions about people," he said quietly. Lauren's smirk widened. "And you shouldn't be in seats you didn't pay for." The cliffhanger came as Clint finally picked up his phone, his calm expression unchanging. He typed something quickly, then set it back down on the armrest. "You're making a mistake," he said simply, his words hanging in the air. Lauren didn't listen. "We'll see about that," she muttered, gesturing again for Grace to act. Grace stepped closer, her hesitation palpable as the scene continued to unfold. Lauren's irritation only grew as Clint remained seated, his quiet confidence a stark contrast to Lauren's increasingly flustered demeanor. The tension in the cabin thickened with every passing moment, drawing the attention of nearby passengers who watched the exchange with curiosity and disbelief. Lauren's voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to ask you one last time to move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her words carried a sharp edge, her tone dripping with condescension. Clint, calm as ever, looked up at Lauren. "I've already told you." "I'm not moving," he said simply. His tone was even, almost soothing, but it held an undeniable strength that only infuriated Lauren further. A woman ahead, a nosy socialite with perfectly coiffed hair and an air of entitlement, leaned toward her companion. "Looks like he's trying to sneak in for a free ride," she whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Lauren seized on the comment, her smirk returning. "That's exactly what it looks like," she said, folding her arms and turning to the other passengers as though rallying support. "We have rules for a reason. Some people just don't respect them." Clint didn't respond to the insults or the growing murmurs around him. Instead, he kept his gaze steady on Lauren, his composure of quiet defiance that spoke louder than any word. Grace hesitated, then took a step toward the passenger list clipped near the cockpit door. Her fingers trembled as she scanned the names, hoping to find something that would help Clint. But before she could say anything, Lauren snapped, "Grace? What are you doing?" Grace turned, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just checking," Lauren interrupted, her tone sharp. "You don't need to get involved." Grace stepped back, her face flushing with embarrassment. She bit her lip, torn between doing what she knew was right and the fear of losing her job. As the tension built, a kind-looking man seated across the aisle leaned forward. The businessman, dressed in a crisp suit and exuding a calm demeanor, smiled at Clint. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Is everything all right?" Clint turned to him, his expression softening. "I'm fine, thank you," he replied, his voice steady but grateful for the small act of kindness. Before the businessman could say more, Lauren interjected, her tone accusing. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage the disturbance." She turned back to Clint, pointing a finger at him. "You're causing a scene." The businessman frowned from where he's sitting. "You're the one making a scene," he said calmly. Lauren's face flushed with anger, and she turned her attention back to Clint. "I've had enough of this," she snapped. "Either you move, or I'll make sure you're escorted off this plane." Clint met her gaze without flinching. "You can try," he said softly. Lauren's frustration boiled over, her voice shaking as she leaned closer to Clint. "Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" Clint remained silent, his calmness only fueling Lauren's anger. Lauren finally left Clint alone and turned to carry out her other duties. Angrily, she moved briskly down the aisle, her polished shoes clicking softly on the carpet as she carried a tray of sparkling water, her demeanor professional but her expression tight with irritation. Clint sat quietly in his seat, his attention focused on a book and his hands folded in his lap. Passengers chatted softly, the atmosphere calm, until Lauren's subtle hostility began to surface. Clint had been waiting patiently for a drink, watching as Lauren served Mr. and Mrs. Harrison first, then moved to others in the back. Lauren, however, made no effort to acknowledge Clint. The tray was nearly empty when Clint finally spoke, his tone gentle. "Excuse me, could I have some water, please?" Lauren paused, glancing at Clint with a dismissive look. "I'll get to you when I can," she said curtly, walking past without another word. Clint's calm gaze followed Lauren's retreating figure, but he remained silent. "What would you do if you noticed this kind of behavior? Would you step in or stay quiet? Let us know in the comments below." Minutes passed, and Clint shifted in his seat, trying to find a more comfortable position. He stretched one leg slightly into the aisle, his movement unassuming. Lauren returned the tray in hand, her sharp eyes catching the small adjustment. Instead of asking Clint to move his leg, Lauren deliberately changed her path in an instant. Her foot struck Clint's leg, the tray tilting and the glasses of water tumbled forward, splashing onto Clint's lap and the floor. Lauren gasped theatrically, her voice sharp and loud. "Watch where you're putting your legs. You've caused a mess." Passengers turned their heads, startled by the commotion. Clint looked up, startled but composed, his hands brushing at the water on his trousers. He said calmly, "But you walked into my leg." Clint tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze unwavering. "I've only asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else," he replied. "And if that's too much to ask, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words hung in the air, a quiet yet powerful rebuke. Lauren's face flushed with anger as she stepped closer, her frustration boiling over. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed, her voice sharp. In a shocking moment, unable to contain herself, Lauren raised her hand and slapped Clint across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin, sharp and shocking, like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the passengers. The businessman stood halfway, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Even the nosy socialite appeared taken aback, her previous smirk replaced by a look of unease. Clint slowly straightened, his hand resting calmly on his lap. His expression remained composed, his gaze steady as he looked up at Lauren. The cabin was silent, the tension palpable. Clint now straightened in his seat. His expression didn't change, but his eyes carried a weight that made Lauren hesitate for the first time. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Clint said quietly, his voice calm but cutting through the air like a knife. "What would you do if you were in Clint's shoes? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story has you hooked, hit like and subscribe now." Clint looked up at Lauren, his voice steady and composed. "I've been patient with you, but your behavior has crossed the line," he said, his words deliberate and firm. Lauren's expression darkened. Her jaw tightened, and her hands clenched at her sides. "Cross the line," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're the one who's been disruptive since you boarded this plane." Clint didn't flinch. He didn't touch his face or respond in kind. Instead, he slowly straightened his posture, his gaze fixed firmly on Lauren, his calm demeanor remaining intact even in the face of such blatant aggression. "You'll regret that," Clint said softly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire cabin. Lauren faltered for a moment, her confidence shaken by Clint's unyielding composure, but she quickly recovered, scoffing loudly. "Regret it," she sneered. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" Clint didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, and the passengers could feel the shift in power from the corner of the cabin. Grace, the younger flight attendant, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and determination. She had been quietly observing Lauren's behavior all day, her discomfort growing with every passing moment. Now she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Discreetly, Grace stepped away from the commotion and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number quickly, her fingers trembling slightly. When the call connected, her voice was hushed but firm. "It's Grace," she said. "We have a situation on the plane." Grace returned to her post, her face a mix of worry and determination. Lauren, oblivious to the call, stood with her arms crossed, her anger simmering but her authority waning. Clint remained seated, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Lauren's rage. Passengers continued to watch, their eyes darting between Clint and Lauren, unsure of what would happen next. One passenger leaned toward Clint, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" she asked, her concern genuine. Clint turned to her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," he said softly. The tension in the cabin was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engines. It was clear that the situation was far from over. Clint remained seated, his posture steady despite the water dripping onto his clothing. He looked at Lauren, his voice calm but firm. "All you had to do was treat me with respect, but you failed because of your prejudice, thinking I don't belong here, just because of who I am." Lauren's irritation deepened, her grip on the tray tightening as she leaned closer, her tone mocking. "Respect? Maybe you should earn it first. People like you don't deserve my respect." The tension in the cabin was palpable as passengers exchanged glances, some shifting in their seats, unsure of how to react. The unspoken question lingered in the air. How far would this go? At this point, Clint's anger rose. "You shouldn't have said that," he said, his voice sharp but firm, his words carrying an unspoken weight, leaving everyone in the cabin wondering what would happen next. Lauren folded her arms, her anger still simmering. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "I've been more than patient with you. Maybe now you'll understand that actions have consequences." Clint's eyes narrowed slightly, his calm demeanor still unbroken. "You're right," he said softly. "Actions do have consequences, and you're about to find out just how true that is." For a moment, Lauren faltered. Something in Clint's tone sent a chill down her spine, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. "I'm not afraid of your empty threats," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're the one who will regret this, not me." Lauren turned away, feigning confidence, but deep inside unease began to creep in. She had crossed a line, and though she wouldn't admit it, she knew it. The looks from the passengers, the horrified expression on Grace's face, and Clint's quiet composure all made Lauren feel as though the walls were closing in. She tried to shake it off, but her thoughts raced. What if this man isn't who I think he is? The way Clint carries himself, the way he speaks with such calm authority, it doesn't match my assumptions. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pierced her anger. Lauren's unease grew stronger as she replayed the moment in her mind. Why didn't I yell or fight back? Why did I say I'd regret it? Her stomach twisted as the realization hit her. She had let her prejudice and anger take over, and now she could smell trouble coming. Lauren glanced around the cabin, hoping to find some support. But the passengers were no longer on her side. The businessman glared at her, his arms crossed in silent judgment. The nosy socialite whispered to her companion, shaking her head disapprovingly. Grace looked like she wanted to disappear, her hands trembling as she clutched the passenger list. Clint, meanwhile, remained seated, his expression calm but unreadable. He crossed his legs slowly, leaning back in his seat with a quiet confidence that made Lauren's unease grow deeper. Clint didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to act out. His silence said everything. Lauren didn't want to hear it. The tension in the cabin thickened as Lauren tried to regain control of the situation. But no matter what she said or did, she couldn't shake the feeling that her actions would soon catch up to her. Clint's words echoed in her mind. "You're making a mistake." Unbeknownst to Lauren, Clint had already sent a message, and his quiet response to the slap wasn't submission, it was strategy. Trouble was brewing, and Lauren was about to find out just how big of a mistake she had made. What do you think Clint should do next? Let us know in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. The tension in the cabin was thick as Lauren paced back and forth near Clint's seat, her frustration bubbling over. Clint remained seated, calm and composed as though the situation wasn't affecting him at all. But deep down, Lauren could feel the weight of her actions pressing in on her. Clint, without a word, reached for his phone. His movements were deliberate, and he typed something quickly before setting the device on the armrest beside him. The gesture seemed simple, but it carried an unspoken power that made Lauren glance uneasily at the phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Lauren asked, her voice sharp. Clint didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "You'll find out soon enough," he said softly, his words carrying a weight that deepened Lauren's unease. If you think Lauren's reaction was uncalled for, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The cabin fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the plane's engines. Passengers exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. The nosy woman, who had watched the entire ordeal with wide-eyed fascination, leaned forward in her seat. "Clint Eastwood, you're amazing," she blurted out, her admiration shining brightly. Clint turned toward her, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "Thank you," he replied. "Remember this moment. It's always worth standing up for what's right." As Clint settled into his seat, the atmosphere felt lighter, the service impeccable. But more importantly, it was filled with respect. As he gazed out the window, watching the runway blur into the sky, a sense of peace washed over him. The events of that day had left a lasting impact, not just on the passengers and crew who had witnessed, but on everyone who had seen the story unfold. Clint knew that his actions had turned an injustice into a lesson, one that would ripple far beyond that single flight. He smiled, knowing that sometimes the most powerful victories weren't about winning, they were about inspiring change. As the passengers settled into their seats, Clint quietly reached for his phone. In the aftermath of what had unfolded, he knew this wasn't just about him, it was about changing a system that allowed prejudice and assumptions to thrive. As the jet climbed higher into the clouds, Clint settled into his seat at the front of the plane. The window beside him framed a breathtaking view of the horizon, the world below fading into a sea of blue and white. He gazed out at the endless sky, a sense of peace washing over him. This wasn't just about confronting prejudice or asserting his authority. It was about turning a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson, one that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Clint smiled to himself, his reflection faintly visible in the window. He knew this was just the beginning. With every decision, every policy, and every act of leadership, he was shaping a future where respect and kindness were the standard, not the exception. The plane soared higher, the engines humming softly as it moved toward its destination, and Clint, seated at the helm of his vision, felt a quiet triumph that no turbulence could ever shake. In a public statement released shortly after the flight, Clint spoke directly to the world. His words carried a message that resonated far beyond the confines of the jet. "Luxury isn't about appearances," he said in a heartfelt video that quickly went viral. It's about the experience we create for everyone. True success is measured not by what you can afford, but by how you treat others. This is why I'm implementing new policies across my airline to ensure that every passenger, no matter who they are, feels valued and respected. The statement sparked conversations across social media, with people applauding Clint's leadership and his commitment to change. Hashtags like Akron Respect Above All and Luck Clint's Vision trended for days, inspiring others to reflect on their own behavior and biases. If you love the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, come on, and share with people around you.